Katerina or Kat if you're new here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the best books I have read so far this year. And when I mean best books, I don't mean like something that is like perfectly written 100%. I just mean the best books in the sense of what I find to be the best books that I've read so far this year, whether it's because I read them because they were a fun time, whether it was because they were a literary masterpiece, whether it was because their fantasy world was so intricately built. There's a reason why I felt like this book so far this year has been the best book that I've read. Some of these were 5 stars, some of these were a little bit less than 4 stars, some of these were actually even just at 4 stars, but yet I still feel like they were a good book and I really enjoyed them and they're still sticking with me. So let's talk about them because I have quite a few books here to talk about. So starting off, not necessarily at the bottom of the totem pole, but just books that I really enjoyed, and I'm gonna work my way up to the best book I've read so far in 2026. But at the bottom here, we have Kingdom of the Feared. This is by Katerina Maniscalco. This is the 3rd book in the Kingdom of the Wicked trilogy. This has been a long time coming. I've had this series for quite some time, as in I've had them since they pretty much came out, and I had only read Kingdom of the Wicked many years ago, and I actually just finished both Kingdom of the Curse and Kingdom of the Feared this last month, and I enjoyed both of them, but most importantly, I enjoyed Kingdom of the Feared. I felt like it was just really well done in wrapping up the trilogy, but more importantly, if you haven't read this trilogy or if you're looking for a really fun, what I would consider new adult fantasy, this follows our main character, Amelia. She is a witch, and in this world, the underworld, hell, exists, and there's actually 7 circles of hell where each of those circles are ruled by a different prince, and of course then there is the devil that rules over all of them. And Amelia has a twin sister, and both her and her twin sister are witches, and unfortunately one day Amelia's twin sister is murdered, and she's not the only one murdered. A bunch of other witches are also being murdered, and so Amelia is kind of brought into this mystery of why these individuals are being murdered, and so she decides to use dark magic and call upon one of the demons of the underworld, but unfortunately she calls upon one of the demon princes of the underworld, Wrath, and so they are entangled in a mystery, in a prophecy. This was just a fun fantasy. I do think that this fantasy series started off YA, but by this book it is definitely not YA. In fact, I do feel like this trilogy should be republished as adults, kind of like ACOTAR was, because the spiciness of these books can get very spicy. But this book for me was just nostalgia. It felt like I was going back in time when it came to YA fantasy or the beginnings of new adult fantasy, and it was just so enjoyable. I loved our characters. I loved our dynamics between the princes, because while they are kind of enemies to each other, they're also still a family at the end of the day. And so this series was such a fun time, but I honestly think the Kingdom of the Feared is the one that stood out the most to me. Then following that, we had one of the few romantasy books to stand out to me this year. This is the 2nd book, and that is The Jessed Crown by Sarah Hashem. This is the 2nd book in the Scorched Thrones duology. This is a Egyptian inspired fantasy, and while it is a romantasy, I will say that the romance part is there, and it's beautiful, and it's yearning, and it's a longing kind of romance, and it's a very passionate kind of romance, but I will say that the author did this really great job of balancing both romance and fantasy. So if you haven't heard of this book, this follows our main character Sylvia, and she ends up running away or escaping from the Jessed Kingdom after it has fallen, and she is trying to hide herself, and she's trying to hide her true identity, but one day she ends up releasing her magic, and it catches the attention of an enemy prince, and instead of executing her like he has the rights to, he instead brings her in and starts to train her for these trials. It is amazing, and I feel like while this is a romantasy, I would consider this more epic fantasy with a subplot of romance, because while the romance is there and it is, like I said, it's beautiful and it's longing and it's more yearning and passionate, I do feel like the magic system is the thing that's focused on the most, and that the characters and the character dynamics and the world building is a lot more focused on. Definitely recommend, if you haven't read the Scorched Throne duology yet, go read it. Then stepping away from fantasy, we have an actual sci-fi that I read this year, and honestly became one of my most enjoyable sci-fis that I've read so far this year, and that is Recursion by Blake Crouch. I've mentioned this book quite a few times now in my last few vlogs. I also mentioned it in my last video, which was my mid-year book tag. I will say that Blake Crouch has now probably become an instant auto-buy author for me, just because of how he writes his plots and his plot twists. This one specifically, which is so interesting about it, it gives you so little in the synopsis because of the fact that this book, within 10 pages, you would be spoiled by it. This follows 2 of our characters. One is a detective from New York and another is a neuroscientist, and in this world there is this epidemic or pandemic going around, which is called false memory syndrome, where people are getting memories that are not their own, and it's causing them to go crazy. And it's causing our detective to try to figure out what's going on. Where is this fake memory syndrome coming from? Why are people getting it? Where did it start? And of course, we also follow a neuroscientist who might be the key to a lot of this. The plot twists in here are just absolutely insane. This is one of those books that when you sit down and read it, you kind of want to read it from beginning to end, and it's not a book that you really want to stop just because of the fact that you feel like you're gonna miss something if you set it down. This was so much fun. This was a wild ride. Then going back into fantasy, which I think actually most of the next books are all fantasy, but the next one is another romantasy, which I also feel like did an amazing job at balancing the romance and the fantasy aspect of it, and it is The Second Death of Locke. This is by V.L. Bovellino. This was such a fun read. This follows our main character, Gray, and she is a well or a hand, and well or hands are pretty much this well, this vessel of magic for their mages to use to pull magic from. And so these kingdoms are all in this interlocked war, which has been going on for multiple years, and it started off because of the fact that there was a fall of another kingdom, that another kingdom fell, and all of a sudden everyone's blaming each other for the fall of that kingdom. And what ends up happening is our main character, Gray, and her magician, Kier, end up on a mission where they end up having to escort this woman, this girl that they have found, across all of the kingdoms. But what Kier doesn't know, her magician doesn't know, is that if Gray dies, all of magic will die with her. So I found this very interesting. As I said, V.L. Bovellino does an amazing job at balancing the fantasy and the romance aspect of it. Once again, you get a romance that is yearning, that's passionate, that's longing, but more importantly, very rarely in fantasy or romantasy do you see romances that are best friends to lovers instead of enemies to lovers. 90% of the romantasies or the fantasies on my shelf are enemies to lovers. I think it just made it very different because of the fact that here are these really good friends. They've been friends for most of their life and they both have a love for each other. I really enjoyed it. I also think that the plot was so well done. The plot twists in here were really well done. There were some that you could kind of guess where it was going, and then some of them where you were like, I did not see that coming. Then the next one is probably one of the best sequels that I've read so far this year, the most memorable. It ends up solidifying the fact that I will probably always be picking up this author, and that is The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. I mean, I feel like I shouldn't have to explain this series or who Brandon Sanderson is. Brandon Sanderson does such an amazing job at writing accessible fantasy. And what do I mean by accessible fantasy? I mean that his writing isn't so overly complicated that you can't follow the storyline, that you can't follow the magic system, that you can't follow the political intrigue. I think that that is what's so amazing about his writing. It's that it's very accessible, it's easy, and people that are entering fantasy for the first time will find that his books are very easy to pick up as first-time fantasy readers. Now, if you haven't heard of the Mistborn series, this follows multiple characters who are trying to overthrow the Lord Ruler. The Lord Ruler has been ruling since the beginning of time. But not only that, there's a magic system, a very interesting magic system, where people are able to burn metals and take power from those metals. And so you have Mistborns who are very rare. They're able to burn all of the metals, and then there's a specific metal where they are able to burn it and they'll be even more powerful. Think of like the Matrix. That's kind of like what I think about when these individuals are burning these metals and using these powers, is the way that Neo is able to do his power. That is what Mistborns remind me of. But the magic system is very interesting. I absolutely love it. But what I think I love most is the political intrigue as well as our character dynamics, which leads me to the next book, because I couldn't just stop there with Brandon Sanderson. I did need to finish out the Mistborn trilogy. The Mistborn trilogy ended up being probably one of the best trilogies in fantasy that I've read in a very long time, and so of course The Hero of Ages also made it to my list of best books for 2026 so far. I mean, this was probably the best finale to a book I have ever read. Brandon Sanderson does this thing where he's still introducing, you're like figuring things out, you're being introduced to things, and you're like, how is this even gonna wrap up? You're introducing new plots to me, you're introducing new plot twists, you're introducing new themes. How are you even gonna wrap this book up? Don't question him, because he does. He wrapped up The Hero of Ages so well. He wrapped up the Mistborn Era 1 trilogy so well that I was just floored. I don't even know words to say because of the fact that this world was just so vivid. I was floored with how amazing this trilogy was, and probably has ended up becoming one of my top 10 books ever. And then of course there was one other epic fantasy that I read this year that I think is the most memorable to me that I keep thinking back on, and that was Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong. This is my first book by M.L. Wong. I have not read The Sword of Kaigen yet. I will be reading The Sword of Kaigen. This was phenomenal. In this world you have a lot of different things that are going on. First of all, you have a lot of classism, you have a lot of misogyny. Women are not allowed in a lot of high-powered seats or high-powered jobs, and our main character defies all of that. She ends up coveting one of the high mage's positions. So she ends up becoming a high mage, which has never been heard of in history. However, her colleagues treat her like trash. But because of that, she is not given a true assistant. So most high mages get an assistant to help them in their studies. In fact, she is given a janitor, and the janitor is actually a Quen. And Quen are a very low class. They're these slave class. These two unlikely duos end up uncovering a very dark secret. Now, the thing about this book is that it goes over a lot of dark themes. It goes over classism, misogyny, colonization, conquered history. And so I think that that's why this book was so phenomenal, was because of the fact that it was hitting on themes that were so hard to hear about, but yet at the same time were very much so prevalent in today's society. Probably one of the best books I've read in a very long time. And then topping off at the best book that I've read so far this year, one that is very memorable to me and I really enjoyed. It was a very big surprise to me because it is a historical literary fiction, a historical romance, something that I didn't think I would enjoy as much as I did, and that is Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I feel like many people know what this book is about. Atmosphere follows our main character Joanne, and Joanne is one of the first women, or one of the few first women to be accepted into the astronaut space program at NASA. And this is a really great example of women in STEM fields and women trying to historically push forward in STEM fields and in fields where males are the dominant voice. And I think it's so prevalent and so important today because of the fact that we're still doing this. We're still trying to find our voice in fields that are mostly male dominated. This book is also about friendship and romance. This book has everything. It has the love, it has the family, but it also has those historical moments of women making history. It's one of the very few books to have ever made me cry in a very, very long time. And of course, it made it to the #1 spot, at least so far this year. And so those were the best books that I've read so far this year. I mean, there's so many really great books that I've read this year, but those ones definitely are the most memorable to me. Hopefully, maybe you found some book recommendations during this video. Maybe there's some books that you've been holding off on, but maybe I've convinced you to read them otherwise. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If there's any book this year that has been the most memorable to you, definitely leave it in the comments below. If you like this video, definitely check out my other videos as well as subscribe to my channel for more videos. I will see you in my next video. Bye!